Before I spend the rest of the month talking about myths, I guess I should attempt at defining what myths are. Defining myth is tough, and no one's ever really come up with a universally accepted definition. Words are fluid, and meanings change, so it's no surprise that it's kind of a hard thing to do. If you break the word down into its two original components, you get the Greek words mythos and logos. In the ever-excitingly entitled article, Exploring the Nature of Myth and Its Role in Science, W. Bruce Masse says this: Greek mythology appropriately meant speaking words about stories. But if you throw around the word nowadays, you're probably using it to talk about a misconception or something along the lines of a superstition. We've created a barrier between myth and truth, making it synonymous with falsehood. So the whole process seems kind of fraught. But I still think it's a worthwhile exercise, because if I'm going to be talking about it repeatedly, you guys should probably know what I mean by it. So I'm going to kind of Frankenstein a definition here from several others, starting with one a professor gave me when I was taking his classical mythology course. It should be noted that this course dealt exclusively with Greek myth, but I think the definition is a good starting point for us. A set of stories set in the past, held by the culture of the time, and that have exemplary power to explain the present. The next one is from that article I just quoted. Cultural accounts of major events that typically happened in the remote past of that culture when the world was different from today. And finally, a definition which I don't fully love, but I think brings in a very useful idea. It comes from Crash Course Mythology, and I'll just let the host, Mike, explain it.
So we're going to start by saying that a myth is a story. But it's a special kind of story that, for the purposes of this series, has two primary characteristics: significance and staying power.
Notice how when defining those stories, it separates two aspects: religion and truth. Now, I don't think you can completely detach religion from mythology. The Greeks told stories about the gods they worshipped, and our second definition may not mention religion at first, but if you go down past the part that I quoted, you'll see it says this: they are considered truthful, and mostly are profoundly sacred, or at least imbued with strong religious and ritual overtones. So, why do I want to sideline religion? Well, I don't, but it's important to understand two things. One, religion meant something extremely different to older societies than it does to us today, and two, myths weren't only religious. They also had historical value, as well as teaching morals and even entertainment. Myths are more than religion. Okay, so what about truth, or more accurately, falsehood? Why am I excluding that? Well, it's for two reasons. One, it limits what I'm willing to talk about. Later in this month, I'll tell you a Navajo myth. And I think that would be kind of disrespectful if I threw a tradition that's still being practiced into a category that has to be false. Also, there are American myths of Jesse James, Johnny Appleseed, and George Washington, figures that really existed but have been mythologized. Which brings me to my second point. Myths carry truth. It might be truth with monsters and deities thrown in, but many myths have a connection to the real world. Societies from the Middle East, North Africa, Mediterranean, and many more all have giant flood myths. And it's not improbable to assume that those were inspired by true events. The Klamath people have a whole myth about the forming of Crater Lake. It involves the chief of the below world fighting with the chief of the above world. Fire spews out of a volcano and it collapses to form the lake. Guess what? Scientific study says that after a volcano erupted, the lava chamber underneath caused it to collapse, creating the crater lake. When we assign myths as inherently false stories, we not only lose mythologies that are still being practiced, but we lose sight of what the mythologies were to the people who told them and start by taking our assumptions of what the myths are. So taking this and the two previous definitions into account, how do I define myth? Well, how about this? Myths are a set of shared stories that are set in a culture's past while informing their present. They fill multiple functions and are both perceived as traditionally true and can reflect real-world events. It's not perfect, but I think it will work for what I'm trying to talk about this month. But I am curious, what do you guys think about myth? How do you define it, and how do you perceive it as true or false? I'll see you tomorrow, VEDS. May our stories outlive us all.